right, welcome into the Warchant.com report. I'm Jeff Cameron of 97.9 ESPN Radio. To my left, Ira Schoffel. To my right, Gene Williams, both with Warchant.com. It's football season again, guys. Welcome in, everybody. It's a glorious time of year indeed. And, of course, what an opportunity. Florida State, Alabama, 8 o'clock, ABC. This will be fun. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, brand new. $1.5 billion spent on a football stadium. You think this country likes football a little bit? So there it is. And right off the bat, I want to get to, we just had the depth chart released. I'll start with you, Ira. You wrote an article about it for Warchant.com. Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, nothing crazy. I mean, it was pretty much what we expected, especially along the lines of scrimmage where you knew on the defensive line it's basically the guys that they had coming back, with the exception of Brian Burns steps in as a starter as expected, with DeMarcus Walker moving on. Offensive line's basically what it's been for the last couple of weeks. You know, left to right, you got Derek Kelly at left tackle. At left guard, you've got Landon Dickerson. At center, you've got Alec Eberle. Right guard, you've got Cole Minshew, and then at right tackle, you've got Rick Leonard. Most of those guys have played a lot of college football. They played a lot of Florida State, so there's no big surprises there. The only surprise a little bit on the offensive line was that Josh Ball, a redshirt freshman, is listed as the top backup at both tackle positions, left tackle and right tackle. That might speak to their concerns about that position. They may only feel like three guys really are the guys they're very comfortable with at tackle. Otherwise, you know, nothing major surprises. I think some people were surprised to finally see the starters at cornerback, field corner, and at the star position. Kyle Myers, sophomore, who looked really good last year at corner and at defensive back, is the projected starter at star. And then Levante Taylor, it looks like, won that field cornerback position. I wouldn't get too married to those starters in the defensive backfield. They've got 7 or 8 defensive backs that they feel good about, and those guys are going to rotate a lot. And then otherwise, I think the other big news probably was number 2 quarterback. J.J. Cosentino is a fourth-year junior, but he was not listed as the outright backup DeAndre Francois. It was him or the true freshman, Bailey Hockman or James Blackman. James Blackman's had a huge camp. He might actually be that number 2 quarterback, which is a little bit surprising considering he's been on campus for all of about a month.
It's the time of year where you kind of get it all figured out, your ducks in a row, you play this first game, because Florida State is preseason ranked number 3, Alabama obviously number 1 in the country. The expectations are huge. The schedule is very difficult, Gene. So in the areas where you look at the depth chart and it is thin, you get worried and everybody holds their breath about injuries. I agree with Ira. You don't hold your breath on this one because a lot of guys are versatile enough to play a lot of positions in that secondary. But this is a significant season and a season for Jimbo Fisher in Florida State that could change the way that he's viewed to some degree, or not? Do you think he's already in place as one of those top 3 or 4 coaches in the country no matter what happens this year?
Well, not if you look at some of those off-season lists, Jeff. I mean, it's crazy the variation you will see. I've seen anywhere from number 3 to number 19. Now, that number 19, I think, was Matt Hayes, who's a Gator troll. He was probably just trying to put that out there to get some clicks. But still, I think there's a debate. You got Saban, you got Urban Meyer. You know, is he in that top 5? I think he needs to have another really good season to be able to prove it. And I think this is the year. You got your returning quarterback. You got a stellar defense with a lot of experience. I think he needs to prove something this year to solidify himself as a definite top 5 coach. If he doesn't this year, if he falls short again, you go, well, you know, maybe he's a good recruiter, he's a decent coach, but maybe he's not an elite top coach.
His record certainly suggests he's elite up to this point, but you're right, you have to, it's a what have you done for me lately business, and with Dabo Swinney.
What have you done without Jameis? That's going to be the narrative if he doesn't do it this year.
Oh, it certainly will be, yeah. And the fact that Dabo Swinney just won a national title in your own division, and is whether or not Clemson has overtaken Florida State as the top team in the ACC, that's all on the radar. Assistant coach is under a lot of pressure and a lot of scrutiny. I think the question is, who would you name? But I think we all know the answer is going to be Charles Kelly.
Well, I think Charles Kelly and Rick Trickett, I think those 2 assistant coaches really kind of come into the season with the target on their back a little bit, because that defense last year was nowhere near what it should have been, what it could have been. The first half of last season, they rebounded. You give them credit for that. But the first half of the season, the Louisville game, North Carolina game, USF game even, there were so many breakdowns, Ole Miss, the first half, that, you know, there's a lot of pressure on Charles Kelly to get it done when you've got 9 returning starters. You're basically loaded at every position. And I think Rick Trickett with the offensive line, just because the offensive line was such a weak point last year in pass protection, DeAndre Francois getting sacked 30-plus times. And then you go back the year before that, the short yardage woes, the goal line woes. There have been times during Rick Trickett's time at Florida State where the offensive line has been serviceable to good. The last couple of years have not been that. You've got some experience up front. And this is a team with everything else in place to have a great run. If the offensive line is the reason that this team doesn't do well, everybody's going to be furious about that play.
Offensive line is always a question mark for fan bases across the country. This one's no different, of course. And then, as you noted with Charles Kelly, this is a loaded defense with a ton of experience, and you got a great eraser in Derwin James, who you can move all around. And let's not forget, he was injured last year, and that was a big part of why Florida State's defense struggled, but not the only reason, hence the reason for the struggles. Now, with Florida State being preseason ranked at number 3 and having all this returning talent and being a depth of talent that they have, I should say, is this a playoff or bust sort of year? And I guess let's look at if they don't make that playoff because of the schedule being so difficult, is this a disappointment?
I think there's some scenarios where it maybe wouldn't be a failure, but wouldn't be a success, Jeff. I mean, you're playing the number 1 team in the country to start out. If you lose a close, well played game, is anybody really going to be down on Florida State? And then, like you said, they have an extremely difficult schedule. I've seen anywhere from number 2 to number 5 in the country in terms of difficulty. So let's say hypothetically you lose that road game at Clemson, a really hard-fought game. You finish the regular season 10-2, you go on to the Orange Bowl, but you didn't make the playoffs. So you go, well, that's a failure. I don't know, you lost on the road to what could be a top 5, top 10 team. You lost to the number 1 team in the country in a competitive game. I don't think that's a failure. Some people may look at it that way, but here's my definition of a failure. If you lose to one of those teams, if you pull a Georgia Tech in 2015, if you pull a North Carolina in 2016, this season, that would be a failure to me.
Margin for error gets removed when you have these kinds of games, because if you lose to Alabama, nobody holds that against you, but now you can't probably lose another game.
Yeah, and I think it would be unfair. I don't like when you go into a season and people say, oh, they have to win the national title or they have to go to the playoff. There are a lot of things that come into play, injuries, luck of the bounce. There are things that can happen to a team that kind of give you an excuse. And at the end of the year, you may say, okay, it wasn't what we hoped, but it wasn't a failure. The problem is, in the grand scheme of things, they've had a couple of these 10-3 seasons now where there's a little bit of concern about will they get back to the top. And then you look ahead to 2018, they are losing so much from that defense. You're losing basically that defensive front. You've got juniors in the backfield. Tavares McFadden, Derwin James almost certainly are going to go. The seniors across the linebacker, Jacob Pugh, Matthew Thomas, Roderick Hoskins, those guys are all gone. You're going to go into that next year with a really good offense, but a defense that's going to be rebuilding. That's probably not a year you're going to say, okay, this is a team that definitely is going to win a national title. So now you're going to go 4 or 5. How many years are you going to go between that 2013 season and the next great run? It's important for this year because everything's kind of lined up on this team to have a great run, albeit with a very difficult schedule.
You could lose Naughty and Sweat, too. You could lose 9 players off of that defense, depending on how things shake out. And I don't care how good the offense is going to be. If you lose that many guys, you're going to have some problems, especially early in the season next year.
Well, let's concentrate on winning games this year, and including the first game of the year against number 1 ranked Alabama. What a chance to get off to a great start. That would be the catalyst for a huge season. In fact, we'll preview Alabama next on the Warchant.com Report. Welcome back to the Warchant.com Report. Time now to take a look at Alabama. But before we do, let me remind you, we did a 7-part series with the guys from Bama Insider, of course, Warchant.com and them, on this particular game. Had a lot of fun doing it. You can check it out at Warchant.com, or if you're so inclined, BamaInsider.com. As for Alabama, by the way, they return 11 starters to this team as a whole, 6 offensive, 5 defensive. They lost some real talent. We'll talk about that momentarily. First, though, Jimbo Fisher on Alabama.
We got a great team we're playing, Alabama. Again, they have nothing but respect for Alabama. They've done a tremendous job with their program in the past, in the present, and in the future. I know they will. Their coach, they have an outstanding coach. Nick does as good a job as anybody. Does a great job preparing his team, and you know they'll be ready. Outstanding players. They play very hard, very physical, very well coached. Have big guys, dynamic guys, playmakers in them. They have it across the board. They can throw it, they can catch it, they can run with it, they can defend, they can cover. They do all the things that you have to do to be successful, and they're great in the special team. So we're definitely looking forward to the opener, but at the same time, we're going to have to play extremely well. We know we have our hands full playing a great opponent, but saying all that, we're looking forward to it.
All right, so that's Jimbo Fisher talking about Alabama and the challenges that they present for Florida State. You know, you look right off the bat with Jalen Hurts at quarterback, and you look at the offense from 2016. We're talking about a team that averaged almost 40 points per game. Jalen Hurts throws for over 2,700 yards on the season, completing 62% of his passes, 23 touchdowns to just 9 interceptions. And he really hurt you as a runner. A guy who went over 1,000 yards. Harris in the backfield went over 1,000 yards. Bo Scarborough went for almost 1,000 yards. yards every year with Alabama. Yeah, they're able to do that constantly. Ira, though, there are some weaknesses here. First of all, while they do return Ridley and they have talent there at wide receiver, they're having to replace 3 big-time receivers for Jalen Hurts this year, just like Florida State's replacing 3 receivers. And Jalen Hurts threw a lot of passes behind the line of scrimmage. How good a passer is he down the field? How good a quarterback is he on the home?
He's not a very good passer down the field. And his completion percentage, I think if you look at the numbers, 60-something% his completion percentage, you'd say, okay, well, that's pretty good, especially for a freshman. He's not a very good passer. They gave him a lot of easy throws underneath, like you said, getting the ball in his playmaker's hands. But then on top of that, when he did throw the ball downfield, a lot of times it was those off of play action where teams are really having to sell out to stop that running game. Now he's hitting defenses when they're not prepared for it. And I really think that's the key for Florida State. Jalen Hurts is not going to beat you by making tough passes into tight windows, making big reads. But, man, he is an unbelievable runner. He's a great athlete. He's one of those guys that doesn't look like he's running that fast. But you look up and he's 18 yards down the field, 22 yards down the field. Got very good vision, understands angles. He's a strong kid, so you're not going to just bring him down easily. But the key for Florida State, again, is making him make tough throws. If Florida State can do that, he's not going to beat you with his arm. Clemson proved that last year. When Alabama had to throw it, they couldn't. And I don't think that's going to change this year. I think that they really have to do a good job of stopping the run, but not selling out to make the run, to stop the run, to where they create easy passes for Jalen Hurts.
Lose a big-time weapon in O.J. Howard, who's now in Tampa Bay as well. And to that end, he was bringing up the stats down the field. I think I was reading earlier in the week, 52% on passes more than 10 yards downfield. Not a good number. That's not a great completion percentage. So containing Jalen Hurts, how best for Florida State's defense to do that?
Well, contain him. I mean, it's a little bit, you get a little worried when you look at it. It's a dual threat quarterback. Under Saban last year, they've run more spread. They did a little bit more hurry up, and they did more of the the run pass option, which is a nightmare for Florida State. When you have a true dual threat quarterback, they've struggled big time with that. So, like you said, I think the key is don't let him beat your legs. I agree with Ira 100%. You force him into having to make passes, put him in those situations, because not only has he been very inconsistent in that, he's going against what I believe and a lot of people have said is the number 1 secondary in the nation. I want him to challenge Derwin James. I want him to challenge McFadden down the field. Let's see how that plays out. I think that plays in FSU's hands in that case. What you don't want him is to be able to not get to contain. Every time there's a 3rd and long, you've worked that hard, it's a 3rd and 8, he just takes off running, picking it up time after time. That'll demoralize your defense, and that'll play right into their hands.
Even though Alabama loses Cam Robinson on the left side at left tackle, he was there forever as a starter. Alabama, every year, they return 3 starting offensive linemen and still others that had a lot of play. Always has a top-flight rushing attack. You look at some of those numbers again. I'll go back over what I said. You had basically 2 backs, one of them being Jalen Hurts, go over 1,000 yards, and another one almost reached that total. I know the guys at Bama Insider said they think this may be the most talented backfield Alabama's had. That's saying a lot for Nick Saban in Alabama. How big a concern do you have with this trio, maybe 4 running backs that Florida State has to face?
Well, to give you a little perspective, Florida State's run at running back the last decade has been very impressive. You talk about Dalvin Cook, obviously, James Wilder, Demonte Freeman. It's been a bunch of really good running backs. But Jaquez Patrick, before the season, said he wants Florida State's running backs to be considered in the same breath with Alabama's running backs. That speaks to how good they've been. It's because they've recruited so well. They do 2 things exceptionally well at Alabama under Nick Saban, and it's what everybody else is trying to do: recruit at a super high level, and they develop talent, and they develop it quickly so they can replace parts when they depart. There are a few times now under Nick Saban where you felt like, okay, this is the year that offensive line is going to take a step back. They graduated too much. There's no way. And again, this year they lost to 2 or 3 offensive linemen, but they've played a lot of those guys the backups. You expect them to step up. It's going to be a great matchup. I don't know if we're going to see a better matchup this year of Florida State's front 7 against Alabama's offensive front in their running game. That's going to be as good a high-powered matchup in college football as you're going to see all season.
It's the whole game, right? If you stop the rushing attack and you stop those short throws, you just got done talking about the vertical passing game. You want Alabama to no matter that Calvin Ridley, is a great player and that they bring back weapons every year, you want them having to throw the ball down the field.
Well, if they do that, if Jalen Hurts is able to do that and he's successful and they beat FSU, then you say you just probably lost to the best team in the country, because if Alabama has a vertical passing game, it's over. They're going to win the whole thing. So you want to play into that. But you'd have, like you mentioned, Calvin Ridley. I looked one of the preseason, I think it was CBS, had him number 4 overall next year's draft. So he is an elite big-time wide receiver. How much fun is that matchup going to be if you see him and Tavares McFadden, who is by most mock drafts, the #1 cornerback in the nation. That's going to be a great matchup, assuming they're matched up a lot. I think this could really come down to the other one, assuming they have that matchup with them and we're able to slow down, really to some extent, Robert Foster is the other one. I mean, how will they contain this guy? I mean, he was a big-time recruit. He's kind of underachieved. He ran a 4.34 last year. They're going to try to go to him. They're going to go against him, Levante Taylor, if he's that guy starting there, and try to pick on him, because they're not going to try to pick on McFadden. They're going to pick on the other side. Can Florida State at least hold their own and not give up some big plays against Wood as a speed? And he is their main vertical threat.
We always look to numbers. We look at stats. Every time we prepare for this show, I certainly try to provide some insight into what those represent, and then we talk about it. Well, it was rather daunting. Gene handed out the report for us, and I was looking at the defensive statistics for Alabama, and basically I got depressed as I looked through the S&P and every other advanced metric you could find. Alabama was #1 in every category that mattered. I mean, basically every category that mattered for Alabama. I could go through each number. There's no sense in doing that. I understand they lost 7 guys to the NFL draft. They're going to be great on defense again this year because they are every year.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's the concern. Again, on paper, you would say, okay, Florida State returns a lot of the offensive line position. They return 2 tight ends, and Ryan Izzo and Maven Saunders have played a ton of college football. Redshirt juniors have played a lot. On paper, and then you look at Alabama replacing some of the guys they're replacing, you would say, well, Florida State might have a real edge there. But again,
they lose their star ends, they lose their star linebacker, and you know they're going to replace them with somebody good.
That's the problem. If they've recruited such a high level and they get those guys back on the field so quickly, it sounds like a broken record, but that's the concern going into this game. Again, now this could be the year. Maybe this is the year Alabama has that drop-off. It's just hard to expect it because of what they've done.
But you're better getting them early, aren't you? I mean, at least you're playing talented guys, but you're getting them in the first game. So maybe there's a little rust. Maybe they're not quite ready for the big stage.
You would think. And you also can make the case that Florida State, much has been made about Alabama's success in these season openers. You can make a case for sure that Florida State's the best team that they faced and most experienced team that they faced in one of these openers.
At the end of the day, Florida State's offensive line, Gene, we're going to keep going back to this. I think we both agree. I think all 3 of us agree. How well do they hold up against this Bama defense?
I think you really have to hope that they've been all off season looking at the press clippings, reading the social media, and they are motivated, and they're like, we are not going to get pushed around. There's some emotion can play into that. Hopefully they really rise up, and they're not going to dominate. Let's put that away, but can they hold their own in this thing? Because you look across the board, I think it will fall in the offense. Look at the check boxes. Experienced, talented defense, yep, that's there. You got a quarterback that's proven, that's returning, yep, you got that. You got running backs up the yin yang. You got a tight end who's established. And I even think the wide receiver, I think there's a little bit of question going to camp. Everything we've heard and what we've seen, I think that they look like they're all there. And even special teams, we've heard better things. I think the weakness on Alabama, you want to talk about one thing, it's probably their kicking game. So you go check, check, check. It looks pretty good in this matchup. And then you go, but then there's the elephant in the room, the offensive line. Can it hold up? If it does, FSU wins the game.
If it does, that would be fairly significant because you'd be holding up against what is perennially the best defense in the country. Yeah.
One real positive for Florida State, if you're looking for a positive, is I really think the interior of that line is going to be really good. Cole Minshew's got great size and strength. Landon Dickerson is a phenomenal college football player. As a sophomore, he's going to be a very stout. Alec Eberle should be improved now that he's healthier. So at least you're not getting that pressure up the middle. If those guys are on the same page, DeAndre Francois is going to be sharper about making his reads and pre-snap reads. I think he won't get pressure up the middle. I think a guy like DeAndre Francois with his athleticism should be able to handle pressure from the edges a little bit more, which is where I think FSU will be a little bit weaker at tackle.
Step in the pocket when that happens. Step up in the pocket and make those throws down the field. When we come back, what would a win mean for this Florida State football program, and for that matter, a loss? We'll also make our picks. That's next on the Warchant.com report. Wrapping it up on the Warchant.com report, but not before, obviously, we remind you to go to the Warchant.com game day page for a complete list of game-watching locations all around the country. 8 o'clock, by the way, for the game on Saturday night. ABC. Should be a lot of fun. Florida State and Alabama. Speaking of which, why don't we just start as a panel here, guys, and discuss. I'll start with Eugene. What would a win mean for Florida State?
That obviously would be big. I mean, I think, first of all, the fans would have the bragging rights. Jimbo, you know this means a lot. I know I wrote the story earlier about the 2007 game and some insight from Xavier Lee and how much this kind of meant to Jimbo Fisher going against his mentor, so I think it would mean a lot to him. How about the ACC? They can pump their chest out. We beat Alabama 2 games in a row. But I think you can't really define how big this game is till the end of the year. If you go on to the playoffs and have a great season, yeah, you go, this was a springboard, this was great. But if you, let's say you lose 2 or 3 games, in the season's ultimately not a success, you don't do much with it, is it really going to be that much at the end of the year? So it'll be fun in the short term. The long term depends on how things play out.
Is it big in recruiting?
Oh, I think it is in recruiting. Again, in the short term, but you beat Alabama, you're going against them for so many guys, and that's the thing now. You look, Florida State, Alabama, really more than Florida and Miami a lot of times go against each other in recruiting. So to have that feather in your cap going to, trust me, Jimbo Fisher, Tim Brewster, all those guys, you can, but you know Tim Brewster's going to get all over Twitter and play that up to all his guys about beating Alabama. We beat the king of the SEC. So that's going to get played up a lot. But again, it would have even more of an impact on recruiting if you go on and win the whole thing or get to the playoffs and have a successful season. Creating the larger narrative that the ACC was all too happy to talk about and revisit time and again at the ACC kickoff in Charlotte, that the league itself has surpassed that of the SEC, that the Atlantic Division is the best in all of college football. You want to lend further credence to that, I think this would do it.
Yeah, and on that recruiting note also, it's not just like they're recruiting against Alabama for players in Alabama. If you pick two teams from out of the state that have recruited the state of Florida and South Florida really well, it's Clemson and Alabama, and those are two teams on FSU's schedule they really want to beat. I think this game is huge for the conference perspective. As Gene said, if you go out and stub your toe after that, it minimizes it. But the big thing about this win is, first of all, it gives you $5 million, which is nice. But the other big thing about it is it gives you margin for error. You know, if you lose to somebody else along the way, it could keep you out of the playoff. If you lose to Alabama and you win the rest of your games, you're still in the college football playoff, without question. I think if you win the ACC and you've got your only loss being to the number one team in the country, I think you're definitely still in the playoff. I think there's even an outside chance you could get in with two losses if they were the right losses and everything played out perfectly. So I think this is there's risk with this game, but there's also a ton of reward.
I guess in that sense, what does a loss mean? Does it depend more about how Florida State plays than anything else?
Oh, I think that's absolutely it. It depends how if you have a really well played competitive game and it goes down the wire, everyone's going to go, wow, that was great. Both teams are good. They're legit. How far are you going to drop? 5 or 6 maybe if you lose a close game to Alabama? So you're right there in the hunt. I think the only negative, like Ira said, you lose a little bit of that buffer if you get that second loss at some point. If you beat Alabama, you have one loss, you're in. If you get 2 losses, you're definitely rolling the dice. And that, to me, from an outside, I'd be very intrigued. If you had close loss to Clemson, close loss to Alabama, you finished 10-2. Did they put a one-loss Pac-12 team that has a really weak schedule above a Florida State and then penalize them for playing Alabama?
Yeah, because the committee has talked both ways. They have noted that you should be a conference champion. They'd like you to be a conference champion. At the same time, they've tried to encourage everybody to schedule more difficult games out of conference. Well, Florida State certainly has, and Alabama does every year. And, would you be punished or would you be rewarded?
And the ironic thing about it is, of the two teams, the SEC team, Alabama, is the team that if they lost this game, still has a much easier schedule to go undefeated. Yeah. Florida State, if they win this game, there's no guarantee they're going to run the table, or if they lose this game. So again, I think there's a great opportunity for reward, but there's a lot of risk.
All right. That being said, give me some keys to victory, guys. Give me 3 of them, if you will. Gene, I'll start with you. 3 keys to victory.
Let's see how many of these Ira we overlap on. This is always fun. I like when you go. I love when you go to me first because then I get this. All right. The first no-brainer. The FSU offensive line has to at least hold its own. If it holds its own, I think that really is a good sign. If it gets absolutely dominated, that's bad for Francois. That's bad for that offense. It hurts field position. So many things could go wrong with that if you can't do that. But here's one that I really look at watching Alabama last year. The stat that was blown to me is their non-offensive touchdowns. They had 12 non-offensive touchdowns last year. I looked at an NFL stat. When you score a non-offensive touchdown, 86.9% of the time you win the game. And that's why Alabama is so successful. This game is too close. If you give up a punt return for a touchdown or a pick six, you're probably going to lose the game against Alabama. So you have to absolutely avoid that major meltdown. The last thing I mentioned earlier is contain Jalen Hurts. So don't let him beat you with his legs. Make him throw against you. Make him throw downfield. That goes against your strength.
I'm going to sneak one in before Ira goes so that I don't get totally pushed out here. Can I say special teams and the hidden yards within special teams? Yeah. And, a punt's a good play against Alabama, especially if both defenses are dominant. I'm going to talk about Logan Tyler. I need you to flip field position and make Bama go the entirety of the field, or certainly a good length. I got to see that from him. Go for it.
The cool thing about that is you don't consider kickers to be real football players.
No. I didn't say anything about the Aguayo kid. I just said Logan Tyler. He's a punter. I look at it a little differently. Occasionally they have to make a tackle.
I overlap a little bit with Gene on one of them, but the other two are a little bit different. I think the one I overlap with, they have to slow down the ground game, including Jalen Hurts. They don't have to dominate. They're not going to dominate Alabama's ground attack. They're not going to. Nobody does, and FSU's not going to do it. But they just have to hold their own. They can't get it to where they're selling out so much to stop the run that now Jalen Hurts has these wide-open guys running through the secondary. The other thing is DeAndre Francois, a guy we haven't talked about that much. he's got to make a big step for Florida State. It's time for him now. It's his third year in the program, second year as a starter. Last year, it was good that he played well. This year, he could be a dominant college football player, and I think he needs to do that. He needs to be markedly better as a passer than the competition, and I think he's got a chance to do that. The other thing would be the inverse of stopping those non-offensive touchdowns. Florida State has to cash in on opportunities. There's going to be some chances in this game, whether it be good field position, whether it be a drive that stalls at the 20. They have to get points on all those opportunities. They cannot have those squandered opportunities like they've had against Clemson the last couple of years and expect to win this game. You've got to cash in when you get those chances.
And that, too, comes back some to special teams because, all jokes aside, we need Ricky to make kicks. If you get an opportunity in the red zone and you got to come away with some points.
Well, you think about that North Carolina loss last year. You missed those early field goals that you figured wouldn't be a problem.
And they come back and really haunt you.
If it plays out the way we think, it's going to be a relatively close game. So that those 3 points here, one red zone opportunity you blow, that could be the difference at the end of the game.
Keys to victory. Now on to our weekly picks. All right, boys. South Carolina at NC State. NC State's favored by 5. Who you got?
Not a big must-champ guy. I mean, first game, we all think NC State, they finished up so strong last year. We think that the experience at quarterback, their defense, we think is pretty good. I think they're the better team. 5's a little bit of points, but I think they can beat them by about a touchdown. So I'm going to go the Wolfpack.
It goes Wolfpack here. ACC over SEC.
I'm going to go with the chalk too, just because not that I love NC State, but I do like the quarterback. The defense should be really good, and I have no faith at all in Will Muschamp.
All 3 of us taking the Wolfpack. And by the way, you have no faith in Will Muschamp. I'm not in love with the situation at NC State, and I've mentioned Dave's name on numerous occasions. Two coaching geniuses are not going against one another in this game. Michigan against Florida. Michigan is a 3.5-point favorite. They lost almost the entirety of their team, save for that really talented freshman back and their quarterback. And Florida, half their team is suspended.
Is Peppers playing?
And Florida, by the way, is... well, we don't think very good to begin with, even if those kids do play. So, Michigan, minus 3.5. Who you got?
Usually I go against the Gators. I just can't see losing that much in the very first game. They've got to take a pretty big step back in Michigan. Not that I'm in love with Florida either. I think these are 2 overrated teams. I'm going to take the Gators in this one.
It's tough, man. This is a tough game because Michigan did lose like 30-something seniors from last year. But I think Florida's quarterback situation must be a complete mess. They went into camp with 3 quarterbacks. I think they really went into camp thinking about 2 quarterbacks, and they leave thinking about 3 quarterbacks. I just don't think they're settled there at all. We've seen what that offense has been, losing what they lost on defense. I'm going to take Michigan. Not that I love them, but I'm going to go ahead and take Michigan.
And if you got 2, you got none. They've got 3. They really have none, although I'm not in love with Michigan either. Can I pick Michigan to beat Florida 6-3. Therefore, I'll take the hook and I'll take the Gators. That's what I'm going to do there. Not a good game. West Virginia, Virginia Tech, minus 4.5 for Virginia Tech. That is a Monday game, if that means anything to you. Who you got?
Oh, well, it's Monday. That's going to
that changes pick there. Quickly redo that. Yeah, what do you got?
Yeah. I don't really. I don't know enough really about both teams. A little bit about Virginia Tech. I know traditionally when you go back and look, non-FSU ACC usually does poorly in those first games. They've changed that a little bit now. I don't know. I'm going to go with West Virginia on this one. Just 4.5 points. Maybe Tech wins a really close one. So let's go with West Virginia.
Not me, baby. I love Fuente. I got Tech. Give it the 4. I do. I love Fuente. I think he's a good coach. I'll give the 4.5.
I'm going to go ahead and take it. I like West Virginia.
Oh, I'm the only guy. That's a big one. This is a big one. Here it is.
Breaker.
All right, turkeys. You got to do the right thing for me. Gobble, gobble. Tennessee's given 3 to Georgia Tech. All Paul Johnson does is beat the SEC. That's all. We talk about this all the time. Georgia Tech is getting 3 points also on Monday night.
Butch Jones, Paul Johnson. I don't really have much respect for either coach here. I don't know about that, but you kind of nailed it there. He kind of owns the SEC. So,
and he'll tell you about it.
I think there's been a little bit of angst there. Usually he steps up a little bit and their team does better when it looks like he might be in an important year for Paul Johnson. He somehow gets that triple option working. So I'll go ahead and take the Jackets.
I'm going to take Tennessee, just figuring that Tennessee has so much time to prepare for that offense. I think they'll be better equipped to handle it. I don't like either coach, but we do know Butch Johnson's players will be winners.
Whether they win the game or not, they're really champions in life, on or off the field. Wins and losses just don't matter. No. Volunteers, though. You actually like him to win the game.
I do.
Not character, but the game.
We're not worried about that. They're going to win the game.
I'm going to take Tennessee, I guess. I don't love the pick. I hate these first ones out the gate. It is a little sort of haphazard here. You take a little of this, a little of that. Your bias creeps in. You don't have any quantitative info, but I'll take Tennessee to win the game. All right, finally, the one that matters most, and we will do it against the spread. Alabama's given 7 against Florida State. Who you got?
Let's see. There's a million questions. Florida State's offensive line. They've been 10-0 in openers. Got to go with FSU. 27-24.
They win the game outright.
27-24, winning it outright.
Look at this guy. I did not see it coming.
I saw a very positive in the camp, and it could be a smokescreen, but Jimbo seems pretty optimistic about that offensive line. I think it's much more talented than it's been the last year. I think it does enough to just hold its own, and FSU squeaks out the win.
It would not surprise me if Florida State won this game.
Oh, listen to this guy. Here they come.
It would not surprise me if Florida State, but I do think they're getting Alabama at a good time. I think this is a good setup for Florida State in the situation with some of the factors we mentioned earlier. But I've said all along, I think Alabama's going to win 27-24, so I'm going to take the points.
Flip-flop.
I like the Noles. I like the Noles to cover, but I think Alabama's going to win the game 27-24. Same score, wrong side.
I've been wrestling.
We know how you've been on the your show all last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Been a Debbie
People are very
Downer.
angry with me.
Oh,
man.
as they should be, Jeff.
Well, because I picked against
the Noles.
Because I took what Vegas thinks is going to happen, or I took the favorite.
No, you're saying a blowout.
I've cooled off on the blowout. But I'll take Alabama 34, Florida State 20. So I got Alabama, and I'll give the 7 points. And I really hope that the next time we do this show, I say I couldn't have been more wrong.
We got that crow over there somewhere. We'll bring the crow next week.
I would love for that to be the case, and it could be, because I do think Florida State will be in this game with an opportunity to win it in the fourth quarter. I worry that opportunity won't be seized and that they'll wear down, and Alabama will get a late score to make the score look worse than it really was during the course of the game. But I'll take Bama and give it the 7.
The cool thing this year, we are going to start tracking our picks from week to week, so I can be embarrassed every week.
We'll have a good time with it. Good job, Ryan Kelly. For Ira Schoffel, Gene Williams, I'm Jeff Cameron. Thanks so much for watching the Warchant.com report. We'll see you next time.